Welcome everyone to the next Alumni Career Webinar, Build Your Professional Brand with Kathleen, Brady, and Carlynn Magliano Sweeney from the class of 1996 of Preferred Transition Resources. I'm Maura Sweeney, Director of Alumni Career Development at Holy Cross, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar offered exclusively for the Holy Cross community. We'll be together for an hour today. After the formal presentation, Kathleen and Carlynn will take questions from you for as long as time allows. I encourage you to submit questions throughout this presentation by checking out the Q&A function located on your webinar control panel. We'll also use the chat throughout the conversation, so make sure that you find that as well. This presentation is recorded and will be made available to all participants in a few days. Now it's my pleasure to hand things over to Kathleen and Carlynn.
Thank you, Maura. As Maura mentioned, my name is Carlynn Magliano Sweeney, and I'm the Managing Director of a career coaching and consulting company in New York called Preferred Transition Resources. Today, Kathleen and I will be talking about building your brand and building your professional brand. And before we get started, Kathleen, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Carlynn. I have been a career coach for upwards of 30 years now, and building your professional brand is at the heart of everything that we do. So we are delighted to be here today to share some of our thoughts with you guys.
Yes. So the first thing that we thought we'd talk about is what we mean when we say build your professional brand, just to give it some context. When you Google the term build your professional brand, you get over 127 million hits. And that's all well and good, but it doesn't really get you to where you want to be in terms of what it means. Most of these websites talk about what it is to be noticed, right? But Kathleen and I like to talk about, before we get into how to get noticed, we like to talk to people about the beforehand. So before you build your brand, you have to decide what your brand is and really understand what it is that you're having being noticed. So Kathleen, why don't you tell us a little bit about what a brand is?
Well, and that's, that one of the questions that came in earlier too, as you all were registering, was how do you decide what your brand is? So we wanted to sort of operationally define the term. So your brand is the promise of the value of the product. And at the risk of being a little bit crass, we are each our own product. So what we want to do is be able to identify the tangible and intangible characteristics that make your brand unique. What makes you special and different from everybody else? And that's what your brand is. And
right. So could you give us?
Yeah, it will define who you are and that value. It really is. It showcases what separates you from everybody else.
Great. So just some examples, maybe.
Yeah, I always think the easiest example to give is in one of the most, I apologize if there's anybody in this industry, but it's all about insurance, right? So if you think about the insurance models, insurance companies are all selling similar products at similar price points, right? And so you got to think about what makes them unique, what's their value. So does anybody know what the slogan for Allstate is? Right? It's you're in good hands with Allstate, right? So it is about, when something bad happens and you need insurance, you're in good hands. We're going to take care of you. We're there. We'll embrace you. We'll take care of whatever your needs are. Mm-hmm. And everything from the receptionist who answers the phone to the insurance agents to the claim adjusters, those are all folks. They have to give that sense of we're here to take care of you. Now, yes. If you think about Prudential, again, selling similar products at similar price points with Allstate, they talk about get a piece of the rock. Their brand is we are solid. We are, you got a problem, we got your back, we'll take care of you, you can lean on us. And so it's a different message, it's a different brand than Allstate. And again, everybody from receptionists all the way through has got to support that brand in how they interact with their clients. One is not better than the other. They're just different, and different brands are going to resonate differently with different clientele. So it's just a matter of being sort of figuring out what you want your brand to be.
Okay. So how do people do that? How do people figure out what their personal brand is?
The best way to do this, to define your brand, is it is completely controlled by you. At each stage of your career, you want to think about, what do you want people to think about you? What do you want them to be saying about you behind your back? That's going to be your brand. So you want to think about that. What are those 3 adjectives that you might use, that you would say, these are the 3 things I want people to think about me?
That makes a lot of sense. So as an exercise, Kathleen and I would ask the participants to think about that and think about the 3 adjectives you'd like people to use to describe you. Take some time, just kind of go with your gut, send them in.
Yeah, write them in the chat box. We just want to get a sense of, how you would describe yourself, or you would want other people to describe you. Resilient, motivated, relatable.
Great.
There's one person. Let's see.
Yep.
There's coming in.
Organized, focused, confident. These are great. Trustworthy, helpful, empathetic.
These are great.
Yeah, these are great. Kathleen, do any of these surprise you, or are these kind of what you're talking about?
None of them surprise me. They are actually exactly what I'm talking about. This is what you've just sort of identified are your values. These are the things that are important to you. Now, here's the key. Those are the things that you want people to be saying about you behind your back, but you've got to ask yourself, oops, there we go. Do you behave in a way that supports your brand? And that's the challenge for a lot of people. It's one thing, I always say, one of the things I'd like people to say about me behind my back is that I'm kind, but I also have a bit of a temper. And there are some times when people just annoy me and I want to smack them in the back of the head, right? Well, then people won't think I'm kind anymore, right? So I'm not going to allow someone to provoke me in that way. And it's a great anchor. So when I'm feeling like I want to lash out at someone because it'll feel good in the moment, it gives me that pause. Mm-hmm. So those of you who, you want to be seen as somebody as hardworking and an expert, you want to make sure that you are meeting deadlines and doing all of those things that you need to be doing, and in order for people to say those things about you behind your back.
So what I'm hearing from you, Kathleen, is that you really have control over your story and your brand, which is great. But on the flip side, you have to control it. It doesn't sound like it's something that you can kind of leave up to chance. It sounds like you really have to be aware and deliberate in controlling your brand.
That's exactly right. You have to be intentional. You can't just want people to think these things of you and then behave in a way that doesn't support that message that you're trying to create for people. So, right. Every interaction that you have with other people is going to leave them with either a negative, positive, or neutral thought about you. And so at the worst, you want them to have a neutral view of you. But what you don't want to do is have them think negatively of you. And that's everything. I mean, from everything from the way you dress and present yourself to people, to even during the pandemic now, when we're all, on video, how you show up on video is going to allow people to have a particular impression of you. So you want to make sure that it all supports that message that you want.
Mm-hmm. So can you give us an idea of how one might control your story?
There are 3 main components to branding. And the first one is self-awareness. You really have got to be, as we said, kind of mindful of these things and intentional. So you have to know your own strengths, your weaknesses, your how you behave in the world, how you feel most comfortable. You also have to be other aware, because it isn't only about you. In branding, you don't just get to say, well, that's just the way I am, and be done with it. You have to understand how other people are perceiving you, because at the end of the day, other people's perceptions of you, that's really what your brand is. So you've got to know yourself, know how that you're coming across to other people. And you also have to be situationally aware, because different elements of yourself will work differently in different situations. So those are sort of the three main components, and we wanted to kind of get a little bit in the weeds with you around these things, so you know what we're talking about. So, in that first self-awareness, it really is about being authentic, and I saw authentic for a couple people in there. And so how do you do that? How do you just be who you are? And again, it is about understanding what your gifts and talents are. And interestingly, somebody asked the question about, well, how do you be authentically you? How does that brand then cut across gender and race and those kind of areas? And I think, I always come down to, there are universal truths that cut across all of those areas. But it really is a matter of being somewhat sensitive to how the perception of others, that's sort of related a little bit more to how others perceive you, but focus on who you want to be and own it. They always say conventional wisdom often tells you fix it, right? Find the things that you're not good at and get better at them, and that's your way to build your brand and be successful. Find out what's wrong and fix it. But, oops, I'm sorry, I went too fast. But it really is not about fixing what's broken, because none of us are broken. What it really is about is doing that deep reflection to figure out what your inner superpower is and building on your strengths. You always want to be aware of the things that perhaps you're not as good at, and always be working to improve. I don't want you to think that you just can say, well, that's just the way I am, and not have to worry about it. We always want to try and get better, but that is secondary to building on your strengths, because research shows us that when you build on your strengths, you are 6 times more likely to be engaged in what you do, and 3 times more likely to report having an excellent quality of life, which is what we all really want to have. And so because you can achieve your goals, you feel more confident and self-assured, because you are building on the things that are innately you, and they are the things that just come naturally to you without a whole lot of effort. And those are the things you want to build on when you're building your brand and build your career.
Great. So just to kind of dive even a little deeper than that, how does somebody determine where their strengths lie?
And that's a great question, because everybody thinks there's some magic formula and they're supposed to be a particular way. I think there are a couple ways that you can figure out what your skills and talents are. The first one, again, it's always about mindfulness. We're coaches, and that's our big thing. It's about being intentional and really thinking about it. But the first thing to do is pay attention to what you yearn to do. And I purposely chose the word yearn as opposed to what do you like to do or what are you good at. What do you yearn to do? What is it that when you don't get an opportunity to do it, you feel a little off kilter? So for me, I often say I yearn to write. And when I don't get an opportunity to write in some fashion or another, I just feel a little discombobulated. And that is something that I thought everybody was good at writing. And you start realizing, oh, that's something that's a particular talent that I have, because I just yearn to do it. If I don't get to do it, I feel uncomfortable. The other way to determine is, what can you learn rapidly? What can you do sort of quickly without thinking too much about, without putting too much effort in? Again, it's often those things that we dismiss because they come easily to us. So we go, anybody could do that. Until you start to realize that isn't true. It is, I remember public speaking is another thing that I tend to have been quite good at over the years. Just I'm comfortable doing it. I was able to learn sort of different styles and how to deliver information pretty quickly. And it never occurred to me that other people can't do that with as much ease as I can. And so that's something that you go, okay, that's something to tap into. Let me figure out I'm good at that. I can learn how to do that quickly. Let me figure out who will pay me to do that. Sort of the. And then the last piece too is what feels good. At the end of the day, what do you feel like when you've accomplished something? Clearly for me, when I've written something, I feel good. I feel good about that. In my coaching practice, for me, it feels good when somebody at the end of a coaching engagement says to me, wow, that really was powerful and it helped me make decisions, helped me change my life. And so pay attention to those things. We often think if it's easier, it feels good, that I shouldn't pay attention to that. That's the exact thing you need to pay attention to, because that you build on that and then you take that to the next level. You mitigate some of the things that you're less good at that you might have to do for your job, but you are playing to your inner superpowers. That's what we want people to be able to do. The other way, besides, some people, this still feels a little esoteric to them. They're not quite sure how to do it. The other thing is there are a couple of self-assessment tools that you might want to look at that will help give you those insights that maybe just are not coming naturally to you. The first one, and I think one of the best ones, is Strength Finders. You go out, you buy the book, $25, you do the assessment, and it is something that you can do on your own. You don't necessarily need a coach to kind of help you interpret the results of it. So I think that's great. It's a little bit basic, but it really will get you where you want to go in terms of kind of assessing what you're naturally good at. The others, like the DISC and the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, and the Highlands Ability Battery, those tend to be more labor intensive. They usually need someone certified in those instruments to be able to tell you what they mean. But those are, if you're really feeling a little lost and confused, especially if you're trying to make some kind of career transition, one of those can really be very helpful to you. I will say there's a distinction between the Highlands and Myers-Briggs and Highlands Ability Battery, in that actually the first three are what we call self-report. And in those, you would be asked a question: do you prefer to stay at home, read a book, or go to a party, those kind of things, and it'll come up with sort of personality types and communication styles. The Highlands Ability Battery is a little bit more intense. It's also a little bit longer and a little bit more expensive, in that it asks you to do specific tasks, and it will come out with a profile for you measuring your natural abilities. And it will tell you, these are the things that come naturally to you, these are the things that don't. But again, it allows you to then build on your strengths. If you're looking for sort of a quick and dirty, one of my favorites, I use this with my college students a lot, is mynextmove.org. It has an assessment tool, very similar to one of those self-reports, that will then come up with a list of, here are the things that you're naturally good at, and here's some career ideas for you based on that. And so then, again, it's, even if you are in a mid-career and trying to think of a career change, that's a great place to at least get the creative juices flowing, to start thinking about, oh, these are the areas that I'm most interested, or that I'm best suited for, and kind of looking for the common denominators for them. I will also add, we're talking a lot about your sort of skills and talents, your natural abilities, but another really key component, and probably, in my personal opinion, the one that is even more important in terms of helping you determine what your brand ought to be, is your values, right? Because your values are central to who you are and how you show up, and they're a reflection of your character. And so your sort of your skills and abilities are about what you do. Your values are about how you do it. And so, again, like we said earlier, the good news is you get to control that story. The bad news is you have to control that story. So you have to think about, how do you want to be known? And I often think of Steve Jobs, who, when he died, people talked about, how he changed the world and did all these things, but he was really not a nice guy. And it was a tough person to work for. So now I didn't know Steve Jobs, and maybe he's quite comfortable with that description. He doesn't care what people thought of him. Maybe he was quite happy just knowing he changed the world. Personal choice. And if that was his choice, that's fine. But you want to be thinking about the difference between those resume values, those things that you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go to a particular school. You're supposed to take a particular job. You're supposed to want a certain job title to show your success and your career progression. But at the end, at your funeral, are people going to be talking about your job titles, or are they going to be talking about how you made them feel and how you performed your tasks and interacted with other people? So
Yeah.
really, when you're thinking about your brand, that's really where you want to get to.
Yeah, I love that resume values versus eulogy values. I really think that, that kind of drills it home and makes a lot of sense.
And
Just
I
as a
have to
follow.
know that it's not, but it wasn't my, I loved it. David Brooks wrote a column about this.
Okay.
So it wasn't my idea before somebody challenges me on that. But it's
Well, you wear it well.
true. It's very true.
So I love everything that you're saying, Kathleen. I have to sort of bring it a step further because we're talking about this in the business and professional context. What I'm hearing from you is that a lot of building your brand is about your personhood and things that you believe and their strengths. How do you combine this very personal piece with your professional setting and sort of find that balance between the two?
A great question. You know, and we keep talking about you control the story, and we say that confidence is inferred by the way you speak, act, and perform, and perception becomes the reality. So it is all about how other people perceive you. That's really your brand. That's what it is. It's the perception. So the key is to understand others and what they need so that you can adjust accordingly. And so that you are making sure that you are giving them what they need in the interaction so you get what you need in terms of building your brand. I always like to tell one quick story here. Again, I get to control the story, right? And so but you want to adjust. So one of the values that I have is a sense of humor. I like to make the jokes. I like to keep things light, even in very serious situations. And I remember one time being invited to be part of a very important committee with the American Bar Association. I was very excited to be asked, thinking, oh, they think I'm smart and I have something to contribute there. And after the person made her pitch to me, I said to them, she said, oh, I said yes. And she said, I'm so glad you said yes, because now I know at least we'll have a few laughs on this committee. And I was heartbroken because I thought that's not the reason I wanted them to like me or want me there. I wanted them because of other things. But it was a watershed moment for me because it allowed me to say, I'm not going to give up my value of being funny. I think humor is incredibly important. But at the same time, I now kind of hold back a little bit, and I don't want to be the class clown. So sometimes I use my edit button and don't always go for the joke in the work setting, right? And it is all about kind of adjusting to your situation, which is why I put my periodic table of the elements here, because people say, how does this relate to anything? And it is again, kind of I hope something to make you think about. When you think about the chemical composition of water, right, it's H2O. Think about the chemical composition of ice. It's also H2O, as is steam. Right? So the essence, we don't ever want you to lose the essence of who you are. You are always the same person. You have to be authentically you in every situation. And you don't want to be one person at home and one person at work. You've got to sort of tap into who you are, but know that in different situations, you may be required to be ice. In other situations, you may be required to be, steam. And it really, you've got to pay attention to those situational elements of things so that you can be who you need to be without, or not be, give them, the other people what they need so you get what you need out of the interaction. So sometimes that means, yes, I'm a funny person, but in this particular situation, maybe I'm not going to be so funny. I don't need to be the class clown here. I'll save that for when I'm out, with my buddies.
Great. So what practical tips do we have for building our brand?
Well, I think we should start with the internal, right?
Right.
Internal, at your job. What do you need to do at your job? Go ahead, Carlynn. You're up.
I'm having some technical difficulties on my end. I hope I'm still.
Oh, okay, good. No, you're clear.
I'm sorry. I have my kids home with me, and they've decided to act up a bit. So I apologize. But so when we were talking about this presentation and sort of some things that you can do to build your brand, one thing that I think about is I always, as part of the job that we do, we really have to be listeners, right? And we have to be able to pay attention to the people that we're working with. And one very meaningful piece of that for me is putting my phone down or putting whatever electronic I have in front of me down and away when I'm having a conversation with somebody. Because if I want somebody to think that I'm listening to them, which they should think in my particular professional world, and I don't have this sort of thought process to put my phone away, I say that's sort of shame on me. And that's me not doing my branding properly. Even if I am paying attention, even if there's nothing on my screen, if you're looking at somebody who you're talking to about things that are going on in your life, in your professional world, whatever matters you're bringing to your coach, I think it's very important that you feel like you're being listened to. And we are always in front of some sort of electronic, whether it be our computer or our tablet, our phone, and sort of putting that away. And it is very, very meaningful for my brand.
I also think too, in terms of paying attention across industries, it's about being mindful of what's going on in the organization. It isn't all about you. It's about, what are the things that keep your boss up at night? What are the challenges of your clients and your colleagues and all of that? So it really is, we always talk about excellent communication skills, and excellent communication skills do not start with talking, they start with listening. So pay attention and listen, and make sure that people know that you are listening.
Yes. I mean, sort of, none of these are really obvious, but one thing that I think is sort of something that comes across as obvious, but should be mentioned here, is that if you want to be seen as a good worker and as somebody who's smart and committed, deliver excellent work. That's really something that, people may overlook sometimes, that you really have to kind of put some meat behind what you're trying to sell as your brand.
And, I always think excellent work is the baseline. And sometimes people think, oh, well, this isn't going directly to the client, or I only need to do it, up to this level. Somebody is, there's 3 levels above me that are going to take it, but take ownership of it, take pride in what you do. And I have to tell you, I don't care whether you are, a waitress or a partner in a law firm. Everybody has got to, if you're committing to a job, give it your all. If you don't, you're not the right job, is the answer to that. The other thing too is, and it seems obvious to say, but people don't always pay attention to it, adhere to whatever the administrative rules are. Sometimes those things that just annoy us that we have to do, it's like, you got to file this report, or you got to get your time card in, or, whatever it might be, that just seems silly and like a nuisance. But those behind the scene things are often the things that make the entire organization function. So if somebody spends their time chasing you down for that report you're supposed to put in every Friday, or whatever it might be, that's going to tarnish your brand, no matter how smart and how excellent your work is. If you're not doing that sort of more mundane piece of the job, people are not going to be happy with you.
Right.
When I talk about, I don't know, Carlynn, if you've got other things you want to add about technology, when I say use technology appropriately, everybody's learning this right now, right? I've had great experience with technology and have worked remotely for a long time. Others, this is brand spanking new to them, and they're not quite sure how to do these things. And so, we're in a period of, I think, forgiveness right now, so we can be a little sloppier than normal. But pay attention to those kind of things. And my original intent when I put that in the slide was using things like your social media and that kind of stuff appropriately, because if you are posting things that you think are private about who's sleeping with who at the organization, or telling tales of some great party that just happened where the senior administrator got drunk and carried out, like, that's probably not appropriate to be putting out there for the world to see, because now you are tarnishing the brand of your organization. And you always want to be thinking about that, because you've got your personal brand, which is important, but you are part of a larger organization. You are part of that brand as well. Like, as I said, with Allstate, no matter if you're the receptionist or the claims adjuster, this is what the brand is. And so you've got to sort of put that out there in public for folks.
That's great, Kathleen. Just kind of going on to the next slide, I was looking at the idea of identifying needs and offering solutions, which I think is something really important to be doing.
Where you are, Carlynn?
I'm sorry, I'm on the next slide.
On the next slide, I'm sorry. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Oh, sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
I missed my cue, guys.
I mean, just to go back to the idea of being able to listen and working within the confines of your environment, whatever it may be at the time. I think that that other awareness is incredibly important for figuring out how you're going to express your brand in any particular situation.
And, you know, somebody wrote in one of their 3 things about curiosity. They wanted to be seen as being curious. I think that is great, because you have to have the curiosity to ask questions. I think the biggest challenge I see in the world of work, and where people trip themselves up the most, is they make assumptions about others. They make assumptions about whether it is, you know, their organization would allow them to do something in particular, or how they're being perceived. If you're not sure, ask the question, but make sure you ask the question that you are open to hearing what the answer is. Because if you ask a question and then you disagree, like you start an argument, people aren't going to answer your questions anymore. But be curious and ask, you know, especially when you disagree with someone. One of my favorite sort of ways to couch a question is, help me understand your point of view. It's because, you know, our gut reaction might be, that's a stupid point of view. And we start kind of fighting back and giving our own, but you already know what you know. You don't know what the other person knows. So by posing a question like, you know, help me understand that. I have a whole different take on this situation, but I'd really like to understand yours. And that goes back to what Carlynn was talking about earlier, about paying attention, you know, and really listening to other people and hearing what their thought processes are. The other piece too is the ability to share information. And this is important. You know, I said listening is more important, but part of it has to be, you want to be aware about how other people might be perceiving you. And sometimes by volunteering a piece of information allows the other person, gives them context so that they can interpret the behavior in a particular way. I share a quick story about that with folks. There was one time there was an associate at a law firm. It was a very busy practice, and this poor guy had been in a car accident and was out of work for a number of weeks. And his doctor wanted him to be out for another month, and the guy was like, "No, I'm too busy. I got to go back." So he went back to work early, but was in a tremendous amount of pain, but didn't want to take his pain medication throughout the day because it made him a little loopy. So he didn't. And so what he would do is he'd go in at 9, leave at 5, and, you know, as long as he could take without the pain medication. People saw him as leaving at 5. And so rather than see, oh, he's, you know, going through extraordinary measures, they saw him as being less committed, and that's not what was happening at all. But he never volunteered the information that, hey, look, I want to come back. You know, I think I'm ready, but I can only do this, and kind of share some context. I think he would have been perceived very, very differently. So there's always that fine line between how much personal information do you want to share with folks, and to put it into context, without it sounding like an excuse or something. But sometimes that context can be incredibly helpful. You know, what we were just talking about was, you know, internally, right? So how do you become a good corporate citizen and make sure people within your walls know you, that you kind of step up and help out and don't hide behind it. It's not my job. You know, again, that fine line between staying in your lane and doing what you're supposed to be doing, but also being helpful to your colleagues and building those internal relationships. And that's key and critical. But equally important, especially at different points in your career, is building your external brand. Because you want to establish yourself as being credible and have a reputation beyond just your organization. That is important for you in terms of finding out information and intel from the competition, you know, where your colleagues might work, but also just in terms of building an expertise should there be opportunities that you may want to change jobs or stay connected to other folks. So some of the ways to do that, be visible and attend events, whether they are, I'm going to give a shout out to the Holy Cross Alumni Association. I, of course, went to the New York Jesuit institution. I did have to make sure I got that in there. And one of the things I used to say when I worked at Fordham was join the Alumni Association and give as much as you can, obviously, but the minimum amount to be able to be invited to whatever the President's Club, that level, because they often will do events, where the movers and shakers of the university go to. And that allows you to go and be there and introduce yourself with the movers and shakers and sort of establish yourself at that level that you want to be at. That is, and it's a great way to build those connections. And, the first time you go, you may not know anybody, you may feel weird, but over time, you keep going to the same event, you see the same people, it really, it's important in terms of building your brand and your reputation beyond just your employer. Same thing with professional associations, in your industry. Think of the places where your colleagues go, but think of the places where your clients might go too. That's always a good way to build relationships and truly maintain personal relationships as well. It is, sometimes it's the folks you went to college with who your college buddies that you kind of neglect as you up the ladder in your career, but you forget those people may one day be clients or refer business to you, or just for your own personal set. You just need, you need people who are separate and apart from your work life too. So pay attention to those people and foster those relationships that speak to your soul and bring you joy. I think those are important. Carlynn, do you have other ideas on things to build external brand?
Well, I think that every relationship that you come in contact with, whether it be professional or personal, you have to be mindful of your brand. As you were saying, you kind of want to make sure that you're always putting your best face forward and conscientious and deliberate about what you're giving to people. And it's something that you should always have kind of in the back of your mind. Like, for example, the irony of all this is that my brand was hopefully that I could pull off this webinar with my 3 kids at home. But I don't know if you can hear behind me, it's World War III. So I apologize if it's been distracting for anybody.
I think so many working parents can relate to you. Everybody's sort of struggling with that, trying to be professional and be a parent at the same time. It's somebody just wrote here, Carlynn, you nailed it, Carlynn. I like it here.
Thank you, guys. I think you're forgiving.
I'm kind of glad that happened though too, because that's part of, it's part of who you are. You're a professional working mom, and that's part of your brand, and to be able to show people how to do that, even when it gets messy sometimes. It just does.
Oh my goodness. So that's great. I feel like we could open it up to questions now if we've kind of gotten through a lot of the content that we were hoping for.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Did particular questions come in, Maura?
Yes, there is one really great question that I'd love to kick off with. So thank you both very much. The first one says, how do I build a professional brand that is nearly polar opposite from the one that the senior leadership of the company espouses? And we have some context. So the president of the company is a prophet over people. So there are they expect 12-hour days every day. And this person believes that if you take care of your people, then we can all profit together. How do I accomplish this without appearing to outwardly be at odds with the owner of the company?
That is a really great question, because we do work a lot in the legal field. And so that's a professional services area. And, we work with people who work at large firms a lot. And I do think that people find some difficulty in figuring out that exact kind of balance. Like, how do I consider myself a profit center while maintaining altruism and benevolence and things that I hold really close to myself? Kathleen, would you like to kind of tackle that and go over the types of things that we suggest?
Yeah, I guess my first question always is, why do you work there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, but again, that's probably more complicated, and there's lots of reasons why people choose to be there. What I would say is you want to find out, so that this person believes in profit. That's the thing that motivates, that's what the boss wants, profits. So as long as you can deliver profits, you don't have to do it the way he does it. You can still be kind to people and take care of them and do all of those things. But, part of it is massaging it with your folks, saying, look, this is what we've signed on for, and this is what is expected of us. We have to deliver. I know it's going to ruin your weekend. I'm sorry, but this is what we have to do. So you can sort of do it in a nice way, without running around like your hair is on fire. But you don't have to be, just because that person is mean doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. So you can, it's how do you deliver the productivity and the profits, and at the end of the day, if you truly believe that your way will allow you to deliver the profits, then do it. Take the risk, make it happen. And then you could say to the guy, yeah, it does work when you do this.
That's great. That's fantastic. Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate, that there probably are a lot of people who find themselves in that kind of a scenario. And so I really love that focus on, okay, what are the rules and the expectations? And then how can you kind of build your brand into it and still be true to yourself?
And sometimes I will say, and I know this, it sounds so easy to be sitting here and say this, but sometimes the answer is, my values are not aligned with the organization's values. Therefore, right. It's not the place for me to be. Now, I don't suggest that you just decide that and then just go quit your job, right? But I think once you've decided you are, singing in the wrong choir, it may be time to, don't be afraid. Don't allow yourself to feel stuck, because choosing to stay stuck is still a choice. So there are other options out there, and there's a whole world out there.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will say, when you challenge them, well, why do you stay? There may be the money is good, or it's, there may be other things that work. So then you have to make your peace with it. Say, I am choosing to stay here despite this downside, because all these other things about this job are right for me. So.
Great.
That's a very good point. And not to make this political at all, but I just saw a question come across, or a comment come across the screen mentioning Fauci. And I mean, when you think about his brand and how he's handling himself under this particular situation and under these circumstances, I think he's doing an amazing job of maintaining some authenticity and integrity and benevolence and altruism in a very trying situation.
He's able to balance and be who he is. He disagrees with his boss, but he never badmouths his boss, never
right.
makes him look foolish, does what he can to sort of support, but that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And another comment came in too about that is, person agreed with what you were both saying, and also added that it's easier to be yourself when you are a longtime employee, and you're able to speak up and not lose your job after you probably have built up your brand and have some of that credibility internally.
Yeah.
So somebody just wrote in here, I'm seeing in the chat, but where does your brand live on your resume, or does it? Do you put a brand statement? My response, and Carlynn, I'd be curious to see more of you as well. I don't think it belongs on your resume necessarily, and I say that with a little hesitation, only because different industries have different norms. Like, you would not put that brand on a legal resume. You might in some other industry, but I think your brand is more, again, it's about the how. It may be, I might not call it my brand statement. I might call it my career summary, or career highlights, something like that project your brand without saying this is my brand.
I love that question, because it's something that I talk to people about all the time when they're applying for jobs. And they asked me, okay, I was involved in all these different organizations and I have all these different interests. And I feel like it's something that will project their brand. I mean, it's more of their personal brand, but there's usually some correlation between your personal and your professional brand. And I always ask them, what is it that you want to convey to these people? Do you want to tell them that you were a member of the Federalist Society, or do you want to tell them that, wherever your brand lies or wherever your values lie, and again, it's being deliberate and deciding whether or not you want this to be part of your brand in this particular circumstance. And I love seeing how people come out, and oftentimes people will change their resume and change sort of their brand, depending on the place that they're applying and depending on the organization, the type of job, because when you're marketing yourself, you are selling your brand to a degree. So you definitely want to be strategic in what you're conveying on your resume and when you're applying for jobs and in general in your professional life.
That sort of dovetails on one of the questions that came in about how do you develop a brand within a large organizational entity like the government. And so whether you're trying to build it in a large organization or you're trying to build a brand because you're trying to develop clients, you got to think about who's my audience. So if you're internally, you want to be thinking about who are the people that make the decisions here, right? And who is it that I need to make sure that they are aware of my brand, right? But I think your brand has to be consistent through everybody. And that may mean that, like in our instance, getting clients, my brand isn't going to appeal to everybody. And I have to be okay with that. Because the minute that I start trying to be what other people need me to be, and that's not true and authentically who I am, then I might be able to deliver the information. I might be able to, in a job, I might be able to get the job, but it's not going to be the right fit because it's not going to be aligned with who I am. So you really want to have the chutzpah, I guess is the word, to just say, this is who I am. And you know what, if you don't like me, that's okay. You'll find somebody else who can do the work that you're in the way that you're looking for, and just be okay with that.
Well, and I think that speaks so much to what you said, Carlynn, and to the first question that was asked too about, working somewhere that doesn't align with who you are. And similarly, one thing that I always tell people is, look, if you choose to put this on your resume, like Carlynn said, that's saying something about you. And when you apply somewhere, if they're not interested in who you are because of what your values are and what you're interested in, then you probably don't want to work there. So you dodged a bullet. Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So it's good. I mean, it does mean putting yourself out there maybe more than some people are comfortable with, or like you said, Kathleen, really sometimes not being accepted or not being as welcomed as you'd want to be everywhere. The reality is that, like you said, we resonate well with some people and not with others. And it's just life.
And it takes a long time to get to the place where you say, oh, not everybody likes me. Okay.
That's okay.
That are important to me like me. You know what I mean? I think that's sometimes we allow, especially at work, maybe there's that one boss or colleague who just, treats us badly and we're jumping through hoops trying to satisfy that particular person. And then you kind of have to stop and say, why am I giving this person all of that power for me to behave a different way? I don't really, if he doesn't like me, that's okay. I don't like him either. I'm going to treat him nice, but I don't like him either. So his opinion does not hold very much weight. And
Right. Well, and here's a good question, since so many of us have already developed a brand, whether we realized it or not, like you said, we all have a brand. Do you have any tips on adjusting your brand? If you're interested in a new role that required a new or different approach or a different personality, or you realize, I was maybe oversharing on social media and I want to start reining it back in and showing something else. What advice do you normally give to people?
I mean, that's great. That's sort of like the humor example I gave, right? You sort of know who you are and what your values are, and then you want to kind of rein it in and highlight different aspects of yourself more effectively. One of the best ways to do this, and this is the hardest thing to do, but I tell people to do this all the time as an exercise, what your adjectives are. So, think these are the 3 adjectives I would use to describe myself at my very best. And these are the 3 when I'm a little stressed. So, and then ask 3 to 5 colleagues the same questions. Tell me what 3 characteristics describe me at my best and when I'm a little stressed out. And you start to see how other people see you, and that will then allow you to figure out where you need to make some adjustments. Because something like, oh, if everybody's saying, oh yeah, you're hilarious all the time, I'll say, okay, is that how I want everybody to be thinking about me, and where can I make that adjustment? So it really is about getting that feedback from other people to see how they see you.
Right. And there's also a piece of this where, you know, while you have to maintain authenticity and you have to be truly yourself, you can work on things. You know, if you're trying to move ahead in your company, for example, and the next role that you're looking to take involves more public speaking than you're used to or comfortable with, you can improve on that.
Mm-hmm.
And you can sort of work on your brand. You know, on the one hand, you do want to stay true to yourself, but if your true self is somebody who wants to be more confident and wants to be a better public speaker, by all means, you can practice and you can get better at things.
Well, and here's a great question that came in that dovetails off of that very nicely. Someone asked, can you comment on how we can keep boundaries with our personal lives and being a good corporate citizen, 100% accessibility with emails, et cetera. And sometimes, texting can be overwhelming. In other words, if I want to build a brand that I'm working hard, how can I work hard within boundaries?
I think that is the great question. And so part of it is pay attention. What are the cultural norms, right? So one of the things with the emails, for example, I often felt like I had to respond the minute somebody sent me an email. So if somebody sent me an email 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard it go up, I'd get up and respond. I think you can set boundaries there, right? It may just be because we made the assumption, oh my God, he wants that right now. It may just be that's when that person does the best work. So it's about communicating that, to be able to say, I will respond to things up until 11 o'clock at night, and people sort of know, and then first thing in the morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, you're responding to them again. So that builds your brand. You keep being consistently doing that, they will know that. I have, for myself, it sort of loosely said, try to keep Sunday as a non-work day. People know if they text me on Sunday, they're not going to get a response on Sunday. I try to keep that day just for my family. I'm always looking at it, so I'm on top of it, but I respond. And if there was something that was an absolute emergency, I would. But again, you get people used to those things. So if they're used to you, jumping every time the bell rings, then that's what they're going to expect, but you can put limits in. You can also, again, ask the question. Like, gee, when you email me at 2 in the morning, is it your expectation that I respond to that? And not in, I said, your expectation. The tone is important there. Because if you're, depending on the kind of job you have, if you're in the medical profession, it might be, yeah, if we reach out to you at 2 in the morning, we need you to respond. So it's about knowing that and asking.
Yes. And also different ways of communicating. I think that sometimes there are professions and people within professions who do need that comfort of a immediate response, but sometimes an immediate response can be, this is first on my to-do list tomorrow morning, or just some sort of response so that they don't feel like they're being ignored or left hanging or you're not respecting them. There are ways to create boundaries nicely, sort of, and in a way that does maintain the boundary, but is responsive. And see what they say. You can say, unless this is an absolute emergency, or something where you're acknowledging that their needs are important, but that you are on a schedule and you're in the middle of something else. People don't know that if you don't respond. So sometimes just communicating that information that you are going to get to it and this is when is helpful in creating boundaries.
Yeah, and I would say, right now, more so than ever before, given the fact that we're all juggling so much more than we normally would. I think, everything that I continue to read is just talking about how communication is just so critical because we're spread out in ways that we've never been before. And people have challenges at home that they don't normally have to deal with when they're working. And so I think, you know, that just further underlines exactly what you're saying. You have to ask those questions, because otherwise everyone's left wondering.
Laura, there was one question that came in that I would love to address. If
Yeah.
you have a bit more time. The person asked, you know, when boardrooms and senior management teams are dominant by men, how should females shape their brand?
Great question.
That is a great question.
I go back to, we have to be authentically who we are and unapologetically. You know, I think women have tried for so long, just historically, to sort of fit in and behave like the boys. We're not like them, and we are different, and that's not a bad thing, you know. And I think men are starting to recognize that as well. There are qualities of both men and women that are universal, and those are the ones that we want to look for. At the same time, you always want to be looking for the perceptions, right? So the perceptions of how a woman says something versus how a man says something, how is it heard? And you want to be mindful of that. So this way, in those instances, maybe you got to be ice instead of steam, you know? And so it's somewhat of a false narrative that we are at a disadvantage. We are only at a disadvantage if we allow them to put us at a disadvantage. It really is about, this is who I am. Yeah, I'm a working mom and my kids are running around in the background. That doesn't mean that I can't contribute here. It doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm talking about. And so it is kind of coming back at them and pushing back a little bit, as opposed to, oh my God, I'm so sorry, my kids are in the back. You know, we don't need to be sorry, Carlynn, I was exaggerating there. But I was having this meeting
That's okay.
with two, it was actually with two women, and we were trying to schedule a meeting, and you know, we threw out a time, and the working mom was like, oh, I gotta take little Johnny to the dentist, and oh, I'm so sorry, and she was so apologetic about that. You don't need to tell us that. All you need to say is, I've got a conflict at that time, right? And just like the other woman had a conflict too, I don't know whether it was her kids or it was something else. So we over apologize, and we don't need to. But so don't accept that narrative of we've got to be different. We want to be authentically who we are, but adjust to the situation and sort of read the politics a little bit of things.
And that's perfect. Thank you. I'm glad you brought that question up. There's one more question that came through and that I think we have time for. And someone asked about the build a board of advisors that you mentioned on one of your slides about building an internal brand. Could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that board of advisors?
I always think with a board of advisors, you need people who have different perspectives from your own, who can be your sounding board, your reality check on things. Sometimes it is an affinity group. So you want to talk to other working moms or other women or other people of color, whatever it might be, just to kind of, hey, what's your experience like, and kind of compare. But oftentimes, I think the most valuable people are the people who think the exact opposite of the way you do. I had one friend for many years, I would always go to him and sort of say, this is what I want to do. And he would tell me all the reasons I shouldn't do it, all the reasons it was wrong. And it was really very helpful because I could understand sort of what the opposition thinks. And then it either allowed me to say, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I didn't think of that. Let me prepare for that. Or for me to say, okay, I appreciate that, but I'm going to do it anyway. But at least then you've gotten that full perspective that you need to have. And you also want to have people clearly who are cheerleaders, but people who are going to be brutally honest with you and say, you screwed up, you need to own that and fix that. That's what your board of advisors is meant to do. So find people that you trust who tell you the truth and rely on them.
Kathleen, I agree with you 100%. And I really would like to impress that when you're thinking about your board of directors, think outside your comfort zone. Whenever I'm talking to people about finding mentors, and I always suggest that they sort of look beyond the immediate circle that they have around them, look beyond the affinity group, because you do need that alternative viewpoint.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you both so much. And thank you to everyone who's been on this call. It's been really, really interactive in the chat. And so we really appreciate the fact that all of you showed up and joined us today. Kathleen and Carlynn, this was phenomenal.
There was somebody who wrote in the chat box asking me to put up the slide with the different, how to tell the different, assessment tools.
Oh, sure.
If a person could just email me, I'll send them a copy of that slide.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And I did, for anyone who missed the beginning, this presentation is recorded. So I'll share it with everyone once we've been able to post it on our website. So you'll have access to that, because I know I was taking copious notes, but there's a lot more that I'll need to go back and revisit. Thank you everyone for joining me. You will get a short survey that'll be, it'll pop up after we close, and you'll get an email reminder with the survey. So I welcome that feedback. It's how I get better and how I get this great advice, like you're saying, from Board of Advisors. So you're all my Board of Advisors. Please give me feedback. I appreciate it. And with that, I wish everyone health and safety and happiness and calm. I think we all need it right now.
Great. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.